welcome to Platform Analytics Academy on Wednesday, July 24th. We have another great session on tap with a really awesome speaker. You all may know him. We'll introduce him shortly. So let's talk about what this is all about. So obviously this is for you. We try to bring fresh ideas, better understanding, and practical guidance as much as we possibly can to all things platform analytics, performance analytics, reporting, things of that nature. This is being recorded. It will be out in the community probably tomorrow. And so feel free to sit back, enjoy, and watch. It'll also be out on YouTube as well. So you can definitely rewatch this. Please ask questions. If you can utilize the Q&A, we do have other panelists that are on to answer questions. If we can answer those via type, we'll do that. If we need to answer them live and it's at a certain point in the content that we're going that's relevant, we'll do that as well. If they're unrelated to the content that we're covering today, we'll try to get to those. It may be towards the end, or we may direct you to just ask that question in the community, depending on time that we have. Safe harbor, don't necessarily know if there's anything, but it's always a good idea for us to make sure that we bring this up to you. So please keep in mind safe harbor as you're actually looking at and listening to the content that we're providing you today. So my name is Thomas Davis. I am the host, and we have Adam on. Everybody knows Adam, is always excited about hearing from Adam. He's going to present on formula indicators today. And we have Tara as well. Tara, I love that we can have Tara come back and join us. So Tara and I will be trying to answer questions as much as we possibly can while Adam is going over content. So as I said before, today we're going to talk about specifically building formula indicators, some use cases, and some other things that Adam has added to it. So super excited about this. Really great content that we'll add to our library that hopefully you'll be able to use as you ask questions or have questions in the future as it relates to formula indicators. So with that, I'll pass it over to Adam if he is ready.
All right, here we go. I'm going to overshare, hopefully.
Just make sure you share the right screen, unlike me.
Yeah. Still not working. Okay, here we go. We should see the slide up again.
Yep.
All right. So today we're talking about building formula indicators and use cases. That is what Thomas asked me to talk about. I ignore Thomas a lot. So we're going to talk about formulas, functions, calculations, and then more formulas. So
Nice.
we're going to get the formula indicators, but I wanted to talk about some other things that are really useful in ServiceNow and why we'd use them, and some other use cases that are similar to formula indicators, but are not formula indicators. So I want to make sure you have everything at your disposal to resolve or to handle the issues and the use cases that you have. So before we get to formula indicators, we're going to talk about formulas, functions, calculations, not necessarily in that order. So we are going to talk about why we use formulas at all, whether it's formulas, calculations, or functions, the different types of formulas that we have. We're going to go through those and talk about formula fields, and then we'll get into formula indicators and talk some more about use cases in there. And we want to make sure that you're aware of what you can do. When we go through some of the training, we talk about the basic things on how we do it, but we want to make sure we talk about what can we do, what's possible, and then we'll wrap up with Q&A. All right, so this is one of my favorite quotes. I didn't ask the person if I could use it, so this was a CTO that I worked for. I was in a meeting, we were talking about analytics, and this was the quote. And it's been a decade since I've heard this, but it was so true. Don't make me think. Just don't make me think. That's why we use formulas. I was explaining, all you have to do is take that number and then divide it by that number, and then you get what you're looking for. Looked me straight in the eye and said, don't make me think. Just show me what the real thing is, what we're looking for. And that's what we're going to try and resolve today. So as we look at it and we think about formulas and don't make me think, we want to talk about what's more actionable. What do I see? So do I want to look at the number of SLAs I met this month, 372, or my SLA attainment? How many did I meet outside of that? Do I want to look at my total CSAT score? I got all these 7s and 8s and 9s, and I just sum them up and I have 532. Or do I want to see the average of CSAT, right? We always look at the average of CSAT. Total hours of uptime or percentage of uptime. Number of open cases, a number. Sometimes that's useful, but the percentage of growth is probably going to help me plan some more. And then if I look at the number of cases, or do I want to look at the number of cases or the average cases per agent? Is my team overloaded or not? These are all things that we need to transform the raw counts into numbers that are easier to understand, easier to take action on. So why do we use them? So it's easier comparison. So it simplifies comparing data sets. We'll talk more about this at the end, but I want to compare myself to other teams. I want to compare myself to myself in previous periods. And our organizations are always changing. So if we're able to normalize the data with a formula, we're able to really understand how we're performing. Standardization is really important as well. So we do this all the time with percentages. That's standardizing whatever the counts are to something that is consistent across teams, across regions, across time. Highlight those relative values. Thomas might have 100 more incidents and I might have than I have, but what we want to see is that relative growth. Is my team growing faster even though I'm less, I have fewer incidents to take care of. Trend analysis over time, way easier to see when we're looking at percentages and SLA attainment. I don't want to have to look at the various things that come through. Uptime, the total uptime. I have no idea how to compare that, but if I'm normalizing that to an uptime percentage, then I can see those changes over time. And then data literacy. This goes back to exactly to that quote before was, well, you have to know a lot of things to interpret a number. Is a certain number really good or bad? But if I normalize it and I transform it using a formula or a function, it's much easier to understand what the point of that is. All right, so I don't have an actual poll, because I did not tell Thomas about this beforehand. But I wanted to see in the chat, we're going to talk about different types of formulas and conversions and things like that. So we're going to talk about calculated fields, formula fields, function fields, and then formula indicators. In the chat, can you tell me which of these you're using or not using, whatever comes through? I just want to see that scroll through really quickly, and so we can know what we're going to focus in on. So we're using formula indicators, all of them, more all of them. Good. Not using formulas yet. Great. Okay, good. So we have a lot of people who are familiar with all these. So we're going to talk about some of the trade-offs and some use cases, maybe expand what we're dealing with. And for those of you who aren't familiar with them, I want to make sure that we talk about what each one of these do, because it's slightly different. And so you want to make sure you're using the right solution in the right place. So we are going to start with calculated fields. So calculated field, the most common calculated field that we see in ServiceNow, everybody uses it, is the name field in sysuser. So when I go to user, we all have first names and we have last names and middle names, at least out of the box. Those fields exist, but there's a field called name. And name concatenates first name, middle name, and last name, unless there is no middle name, and then it's just first name and last name with one space, not with two spaces. It's intelligent on what it can do. I'm going to get into this. Super useful because everybody looks for full name. I can search full name. It's there, and it calculates it for me. Here we're seeing in the data dictionary a calculated field. In this case, it is calculating the estimated benefit. So I have a field for the base estimated benefit, and I have a field for the actual benefit, and then it's going to calculate that delta for me in some app that we have in there. I just went to the data dictionary and pulled one, but it's just running JavaScript. A minus B gives me the value that we're going to look for. Again, super useful. These have been around. All of the things we're looking for now are supported, and I think in every release we have out there. So you have access to all of these. Calculated fields have been around for a very, 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 very long time. Useful. It does what it does, but let's talk about why we'd use it and why we wouldn't use it. So some advantages and disadvantages of calculated fields. So the advantages, it executes JavaScript. You'll notice that the disadvantage is it executes JavaScript. It has to execute that JavaScript. It operates per row. So each row at a time. It's not meant to do a lot of aggregate stuff, but it is looking at, like we saw in the example, A minus B gives me this new field. And it can dot walk. It's very easy to dot walk in there. And it's always current. What you see is always current. It is taking A minus B and showing you C. That's really, really useful if I'm doing A minus B equals C. If I have dot walked fields where the data might be changing underneath me and I can't see it. The disadvantage is, again, it executes JavaScript. It's calculated every time you view it, whether it changes or not. So the classic example is name. I wouldn't do it. Names don't change very often. They do change. They can change, but they don't change very often. This is the third bullet here. It's really important. We'll see the little asterisk. It is only stored on an update. It's only stored on an update. So sys name is fine. So if I change first name or last name, it changes the data that's there. But if I were dot walking something else, it's not going to store that. It will display it correctly, but it only gets stored when you're doing some other update. Whenever you're updating the record, it's going to update those calculated fields. This calculated fields are part of the data dictionary. They require admin to create them. And it does physically store the result. Once you've updated it, there is physically a value in there. But that little asterisk, as we come back to it, is because it's only stored on an update, what you see is not necessarily what you query. What you see is not what you query. What you're querying, that last value was updated on. But what you're seeing is it's always calculated real time. And it is always calculated to come through. So if I'm reading a bunch of records, it's calculating all those records. If I do more than just straight conversions, that if that JavaScript is expensive, that JavaScript took a second to execute, and I want to look at 50 records, I might be waiting 50 seconds. So we got to be really careful on what we do here. Generally, I discourage the use of calculated fields. They're there, they're used. In place of calculated fields, I do a little bit more work. Not a lot more, but a little bit more work. And I create a static field, which is what we'd have to do for a calculated field. But instead of making it calculated, I leave it blank and I make it read only. And then I populate it with a business rule or a flow. So I can do a before business rule, which will calculate it, or a flow makes it much easier to do. With a business rule, I'm writing JavaScript. With a flow, I can actually use all the data pills, all the transformations that are there, use an asynchronous on update business rule or a flow, and have it calculate that. If I were implementing name today, I would use a business rule or a flow. I would do that because that way it's only being calculated when I update the first name, middle name, or last name field. Names don't change that often and other stuff does, and I look at it a lot. So why do I need to calculate that every time? Now, a concatenation is not a very expensive calculation, so it's not a big deal, and it's probably not worth changing, but it is something to think about. Does this change automatically? Do I need to see it all the time? Does it need to query it every time I view this record? Or is it something that I know when these things change? That the function that I'm calculating for name is first name, middle name, and last name. If one of those three do not change, then I don't need to update anything. As long as I'm letting my business rules run and my flows run. You can do some system updates that bypass that to be aware of, but an admin had to do that as well. So under normal circumstances, I normally lead to not using calculated fields, but using a static field, a read-only static field, and then a flow or a business rule to calculate that. You do need to be able to detect the change. So if I were doing a bunch of dot walking, you can get into kind of too many places, too many endpoints and nodes to figure out when to calculate it. And then I might still go to a calculated field, although I'll probably look at some of the other options, but it's there. This is key because when it's calculated on update and then stored, and what you see is what you query. You know, you're always setting that. So if I query for something, that's what I'm going to see and query. I don't have any of that weirdness in calculated fields, particularly if you're doing something with time. Time gets me, or for some aggregate that's going in the background, what you see is not what you're querying. All right, we're going to move on to formula fields. Formula fields are more of the advanced version of calculated fields to some extent, much easier to use. So I'm going to bring up the video and hope that this plays. So I am creating a formula field here, a formula field. I do this in Table Builder and App Engine Studio, and I will, if we have time at the end, I'm going to bring up an instance and we'll go walk through some of these live in the demo. But here, I'm able to just type what I want, and it's going to prompt me for what the formulas are, and I'm all set. You can nest these. It's type ahead is prompting what you're getting. So whether it's concatenate or min or max, whole slew of functions that you can use in your formula, and it's parsing it as you go. Really, really nice interface. Very, very simple. If you can do it in Excel, you can do a formula field in Table Builder. Let's get to some of the trade-offs with Table Builder, or with formula fields in Table Builder. Again, super easy. An advantage, I don't know that there is anything easier to use than the formula builder in Table Builder. It's always current, the same. Now what we're going to see is this is mostly like calculated fields. It's always current because it's being executed when you view the record, and it operates per row. I believe you're able to dot walk here as well, but it's operating per row. You do have to have access to App Engine Studio or to Table Builder to do it. So you're in admin land. You can have delegated development, but you need admin access effectively to do this. Calculated every time. Same issue with calculated fields and formula fields, that what is stored in the database and what's there is not always the same. This is a big concern that when you're creating a new calculated field, if you're adding a calculated field or you're adding a formula to your table, you need to do something that updates every record, whether you're updating that field or you're just updating every record, so that at least the initial value gets stored. If I added a new name field and I didn't update every record, that name field's empty until some other update goes and does it in the background. And again, is physically stored, takes up whatever space you're using. So easy to use. So, there's definitely a use case for this. Very, very easy to use. Formula fields have set functions that you can use, again, similar to Excel. If I am doing, if I just need to do something wild and crazy, then I can use calculated fields. But if I'm doing something wild and crazy, that concerns me. And I'm worried about performance issues. I'm worried about having to calculate this every time I load that row. Generally, I'm going to use formula fields over calculated fields. And ideally, I'm actually not going to use either one of these. I'm going to use a function field. So calculated fields, formula fields. Now we're going to get the function fields. Function fields are different. They operate differently. And I have my example in the wrong spot. So we're going to talk about the trade-offs, and then we'll show you the build example. So function fields execute at the database level. They're calculated on the fly. Formula fields and calculated fields execute on the node level. The data comes back and we operate on them. And then we store the data when there's an update. Function fields operate at the database level, and they're super efficient. They're operating on the row level, and they do real-time calculations. Many of the same things we do in formula fields we can do in function fields, although function fields do have a little bit larger library of operators that they can call. Performance is phenomenal. You're not going to notice it. It's calculated on the fly. The data is not stored, and it does not require admin access. This is the biggest thing we're going to see between function fields, calculated fields, and formula fields. Function fields do not require admin access. It can be defined by an admin, and there's a few restrictions that are lifted when you're an admin. There's very few rules when you're an admin, but I can give somebody the function field admin role, and that will allow them to create function fields in Report Designer using a UI. The biggest disadvantage we have with function fields is that they have limited functions. There's only limited operators that we can use. We're not executing custom JavaScript. So with a calculated field, I can just do whatever I want. Good, bad, and ugly, I can do whatever I want. Formula fields, I can do a lot. Function fields, it's a little bit less, but it's a lot of very common things that we want to have, and the performance is unmatched. And we also are not storing them physically, so if we are doing a lot, it's not going to use any database space. They look and behave like normal fields, but because they're done at the database level, we can query on them, we can nest them, but we don't have to store them. All right. So this is the function field builder in Report Designer. So I can go into Report Designer and I can I give it a name. I give that field a name, a label. I talk about what type it is, because it is getting put into the data dictionary. Even if I'm not an admin, it's flagged and sandboxed in a certain way. The operators that I want to use, I have a choice of operators, which we'll show in the next slide, and then which field I want to have. And again, you can nest these, but as we go through, we have lots of options. So whether we're adding or subtracting, we have the normal math functions that we can call, but a lot of really useful ones are coalescing. So I can take field A and B and C and just give me A if it's not null, otherwise give me B if A is null and B is not null, and if A and B are null and C is not null, then give me C. Or I can put a constant in there as well, so I can say, no value here. Really, really useful things that I could have created a business rule for, or a flow for, or a calculated field for in the past. Name, I think, could be done this way pretty easily. But we have coalescing, we have concatenating. I use concatenation a lot for display names. I take a number, dash, the short description, and create a display name so that I know my reference field to kind of get that full description, but I don't have to store, and I don't have to sync the short description at any time. But I see when I'm seeing it displayed as a reference, I see the number and the name or some other field that comes through. Date diff, distance square. These have been added over time as different use cases come up. We'll see. There's a lot here, not everything, but a lot. And whether I'm doing positioning and substrings, this is things like parsing the example for those of us who are old enough, parsing out different octets in an IP address or splitting. I've actually used split table names in ServiceNow. We have table name.field name. I can use these and nest them to get just the table name if there is a table name or table.field. Very, very useful. You see the examples here. These are all in the documentation as well. We can use constants. We can use fields. When you're in Report Designer and you only have when you're in Report Designer, you cannot dot walk. There's a security constraint so that you're not allowed to dot walk. If I'm an admin and I'm actually defining this in the dictionary, I can dot walk. So dot walking is possible, but restricted because of security. All right.
Hey, Adam, real quick, as you're talking about the function fields, and you may talk about this later, you may show it later. I don't know. We've had two that have one's come in the chat and one's come in the Q&A that are exactly the same. And they're talking about the date div and being able to calculate the duration of a date and now, like a previous date, like a created on and now. I know it's very specific. I don't know if you're demoing something like that, but is that possible?
I believe it cannot be done in Report Designer because Report Designer validates it. And now I believe is not a supported function, but it might be an unsupported function that's in there. I'd have to go check. I'm fairly certain admins can do it. Can put in now that there was something to have into that, but I'll have to check. Originally, so function fields, and I apologize, Thomas, correct me if I confuse function and formula fields because it's confusing when I say it. But function fields, what we're talking about now, came out in Madrid. Been out for a while. Originally, you couldn't do now, and I know in Report Designer you still can't pick it out. But I believe the admin can do a created time and a date dip between created time and now to get that.
Okay,
and if you're using these, then I'd love to hear from you, whether it's in the community or through your account team about use cases you'd like to have. Reach out to me, to Thomas, and let us know those use cases so we can document it so we can get them added. These things can be added. They can be expanded by us, but we have to add support for it. And these were things that we thought made sense. And if there's more use cases that would unlock more value for you, if I can get you using function fields over formula and calculated fields, then I want to unlock that for you because the performance is so much better. And we don't, as we saw between calculated fields and formula fields, really similar, just how complicated it can build. When we get to function fields, there's not many disadvantages other than it's limited by what we can build into there. And the function fields do not execute JavaScript. JavaScript has to be executed on the application node versus the database. The reason we get this performance boost is because we put it back into the function field, back into the database, which allows us to run this operator on records, or on hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of records. Whereas if we're doing that on a function field, we'd have to read all of those records and move data bunch back and forth and run all these calculations. And I don't want to run JavaScript 100,000 times, but I can run a concatenation in the database 100,000 times. I don't care. Databases are very good at that. That's why there's a difference. We give you the different options because there's different use cases and you have different needs. And we want to make sure that you can do those different things as appropriate. And I saw there was another question about Flow Designer. So function fields are fields. None of ServiceNow actually knows that they're function fields outside of the dictionary. They're read-only function field. Actually, all of these things that we're talking about are read-only because they're doing the calculation. But absolutely, you can do this in Flow Designer. You can use these in Flow Designer. You could use a function field in Flow Designer and reports wherever you want it to be. You can use them in performance analytics as well. There is a note as we go through this. Hopefully, this will get resolved in a future release. The function fields, if you're not admin, are only definable in Report Designer, but once they're defined, they can be used across the instance. So they're flagged appropriately, but they're used across the instance. So if you define it in Report Designer, I can then use it in Flow Designer. Just make sure you restart Flow Designer so that it picks up the new fields. Okay, but they're used wherever you want to have. Is there anything else that we should answer about function, formula, or calculated fields before we get the formula indicators?
Yeah, I mean, there's another one, and it just says if function fields are not physically stored, does that imply that they can be used in reports but not in a query?
No, they can be used in a query. They're calculated on the fly. Glide Record doesn't know it any better. They're not physically stored. So if I were doing my display name, I mean, generally I'm not super worried about disk space, but if you use a formula field or a calculated field, we are physically storing those in the database. It does consume space. It's probably going to be trivial unless you have a huge table, but it's there. If I am doing a function field, it's not physically stored. It's calculated on the fly. Again, performance is you can't notice the performance issue, any performance, even though it's doing that calculation because they're very, 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 very optimized. And you can use them in a query and they will be correct. They absolutely will be correct. There's no time issues. Whereas the calculated fields, again, what it is right now and what it was in the last update, there can be a delta specifically with time. If you have a calculated field that calculates how much time is open, you can't query that. You can, and you get the wrong answer. You'll query it and get the wrong answer. So calculated fields and formula fields should never be used in a query condition. And if it can be used in a query condition because it's that stable, like name, then you should probably go with the static field and business rule, right? Because it doesn't change that much. So a calculated field, formula field is good for display, but not for query. Function fields are perfectly safe to query on. Absolutely. They are my favorite. If it can do what you want to use a function field. If it can't, then I probably go formula field. And if that can't, then I probably go to calculated field because I can run any JavaScript that does anything I want it to do. But every step you go along that way, the more you can do, the more robust the processor has to be, and the more likely you are to have a performance issue, right? Or more most calculated fields are fine, but you can put yourself, you can dig a big ditch for yourself.
Okay, great. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, and there are function fields. There is a limit of 20 per table through Report Designer. 20 active fields in Report Designer. You can have more if you deactivate them. I believe admin could add more if you wanted to. I don't think we put the restriction on there. If you have use cases for it, let us know. For some of these things, we put some limits in place because we want to make sure the performance is always good and that we don't injure ourselves to come through. If you have a need for more than 20 calculated fields, the 20 function, sorry, got that one wrong. If you have a need for more than 20 function fields on a table active at the same time, again, reach out to your account team to talk to Thomas, talk to me. I want to understand what you're doing, and then we can figure out if there's a way to unlock it. A lot of times we are able to do it with some system property, but I just want to make sure we have a discussion of what those use cases are. And if we need to expand it for everybody, then we'll do that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. So now I'm going to start the presentation that Thomas asked me for while you're all here. So we're going to talk about formula indicators. So we're going to start out with the good and bad differences between those as we spent time talking about the other three. The first for formula indicators is it executes JavaScript. Executing JavaScript is a double-edged sword. We're going to go through some use cases that they're real, theoretically, I guess. Use with caution. With great power comes great responsibility. If you're writing JavaScript and you're doing really crazy things, it can cause a problem because it will do what you want, but that takes time. So be conscious of that. We will talk about that as we go through the examples. Big difference between calculated formula and function fields is they operate on the row level and have the possibility to dot walk or not. Formula indicators operate on aggregates. They operate on performance analytics indicators, which are sums and counts and mins and maxes. And normally sums and counts are the most common ones, but they operate on that aggregate grouped by something, whether it's a total or a group by. That gives me it's very different use cases to come through. And we run into some situations about averaging averages. We have to be careful about that. But I might be using a mix of formulas and formula fields and formula indicators, but understand what you're doing. Am I operating on the field I'm transforming, which might be a cat, a string length, something like that? Or am I operating on the aggregate? I want to take the total number of the total amount of uptime divided by the total amount of time there was, the total number of incidents divided by my total number of agents. Those are aggregates, right? The data is not stored. It's not materialized for formula indicators. It's always calculated on the fly. Very, very fast. And again, there's some limits on how it comes through on what's derived, but it's calculated on the fly, and you can use it with all the standard performance analytics features. I'm not aware, and some of the other panelists might correct me if I'm missing one. I'm not aware of any performance analytics feature that can't use a formula indicator. It's built. This is a very, very, very normal expected use case for performance analytics to use formula indicators that are built on automated indicators where we're collecting data and running a query. Again, disadvantage, executes on JavaScript. So you can absolutely shoot yourself on the foot. I'm going to give you directions on how to do that in a moment. Okay, So why do we use formula indicators? We talked about the data transformations. For the other ones and the field level, it makes sense, right? I want to concatenate first name and last name. I want to get the length of the short description because I'm trying to do some data quality things. I'm going to concatenate these fields or split these fields or whatever it's going to be. Formula indicators are different. So we use formula indicators. It's a powerful way to gain more insight on existing indicators. I already have the total number of cases and I can get the total number of agents. And now I'm going to not make the viewer think, as was asked of me a decade ago, and to make sure that it's really easy to see that comparison, that normalized number, which I can compare across groups, across regions, across time. I can compare myself over time. Am I getting better or worse? And it gives us those meaningful KPIs. So one of the quotes that I like about this is, without a standard, there's no logical basis for decision making or taking action. That's a fundamental to performance analytics. We want to have those measures, but the number of open cases just doesn't give me a lot. Sometimes I need those absolute numbers, but I get it. I'm not saying they're worthless, but there's so much action that can be taken when I normalize that data and compare. I need to have the comparison, whether it's me from last month, me from last year, or a different group. When I can compare and contrast the different teams, I can find out which teams are doing something better or worse and figure out how to help the teams that are not performing as well do better, help to bring up the middle to the ones that are doing better, see those anomalies. I have to use formula indicators to see that. Good targets come from good indicators, and good indicators are formula indicators. When we talk about performance analytics and we're trying to look at, does this customer, do you get it? Do you understand what we're trying to do? We look for formula indicators because that is the icing on the cake. And I like icing. I like caffeine and sugar. Great things. Icing doesn't have caffeine. I understand that, but if I drink a soda and some icing, it's awesome. Okay. Cases when formulas are indicated. So to calculate multiple indicators and average two indicators, very common. You see those out of the box. To calculate, to see operate, or we want to look at all the standard things again: incidents to agents, the percentage or the average number of reassignments. How many reassignments are happening per group? Really, really interesting to see what's going on. And we want to measure the gap. A lot of times we want to measure the gap to target. We're going to set a target, and then we're going to measure how off are we. I have an SLA attainment goal of 98%. How far off am I? I don't care about a specific incident or how many you did, how many you met, or how many you missed. But our goal is 98% so that we're scaling appropriately. Formulas help us see that. Here's the example. You'll see this out of the box. Everybody has this, I think, about the incident backlog growth. So I have my number of incidents coming in minus the incidents resolved gives me my backlog growth. And I'm seeing how many more incidents are getting piled up. Number of new incidents can be misleading. Close can be misleading, but how many are in there? Now, I actually might do some more things about how many are aged over 14 days. I actually will look at this later about adding percentage growth on here. So percentage growth is displayed, that 19.8% is down. It was down. This is a good number. It's down 20%. But maybe I want that 20% not just displayed here, but I want actually that to be my target. I want to reduce my backlog by 10% quarter over quarter over quarter for the next year because I have a problem with backlog. We can use formulas to derive that without having to collect a bunch of data or do math on the fly, but as we're going. So what are some other meaningful KPIs? These are metrics. So indicators are indicators. We don't actually use the word KPI for PA, performance analytics, because we collect a lot of metrics. The number of SLAs breached, the number of open incidents, the number of incidents aging, the number of open over 5 days, number new, number closed. These are metrics. They're numbers. Super important. You can't have KPIs without metrics. But what we want to look at is the other way to build this, the meaningful KPIs based off of these. So the percentage of attainment. If I have the percentage of attainment, then my EMEA team should be doing the same as my APJ team, should be doing the same team as my Americas. If I see EMEA has a much better SLA attainment, I need to go ask questions. Why is that? What's going on? The number of open incidents per CI supported. I like this one because different teams support different numbers of things, number of servers, number of devices, whatever it's going to be, all my CIs. But if I can start looking at the number of incidents per CI class per group, maybe we'll see a trend. Something's going off on how we're maintaining servers because we have a lot more incidents in APJ with our servers than we do in the Americas. And then percentage of aging, not just the number, but the percentage that it's aging. Again, am I going to see a problem? I'm not doing as well as I did last year, or this team is doing better than that team, or P1s are a big problem and P3s are fine. Well, that's concerning to me too, right? I want to get those P1s addressed. So that percentage really important. And then the backlog growth, like we talked about. Important notes for formula indicators. They are processed on the server side. So the process when you get the data to come through, as long as they're kind of normal calculations, it's fine. I'm worried more about this for calculated fields because we're doing row at a time. So if I have 10,000 open incidents, then I'm having to do that calculation a lot. In this case, we're only getting the 1 score per day per indicator. So it's generally not a big issue. But if I was looking at 2 years of data, and I have to pull back a bunch of calculated fields in an index field, and I'm on a workbench that has tons of indicators, it's something to be aware of, not concerned about. With calculated fields, I'm more aware and concerned. But they are processed on the server side. They're calculated when requested. They're just sitting there. Normal jobs do calculate them. If I'm calculating targets or thresholds or breaches or any of that stuff, they're calculated then. So it's not always when the viewer views them. So there are some scheduled jobs that look at them, but they're calculated when I ask for them. Full access to ServiceNow libraries. This is what we're going to talk about. There's a lot more than you can do than what the basics are. When we ship them out of box, we're just doing A minus B, A divided by B. Sorry, normal most of the time, but we have access to everything, good and bad, access to everything that ServiceNow JavaScript has access to. You can call functions from script includes. When you get into some complex stuff, I'll actually create a script include that's client callable, and then I will use that in my function field to do some of this transformation. You'll see I didn't do that in these examples, so you can see some of them get a bit long, but I can write a script include to support my PA functions if that's needed, where I'm just passing in the previous indicator values, and then the math and whatever happens in the background can happen in a script include. Be very aware of performance. Again, normally it's fine, but if you start doing crazy things, then performance can go along with that. Also, be very aware of performance. And if you miss the first two, be very aware of performance. Be aware, be conscious. We'll talk about some of the things that are in here. When it's a simple calculation, it's fine. But if we have it do some of the advanced use cases, we have to make sure that we're not showing too much on the screen at the same time and not asking it to load up 100,000 records in a second, right? And do a bunch of calculations. All right, let's talk about some of those use cases that come through. I think I'm doing okay with time right now.
Yeah, we have some Are you talking about your use cases or the ones that are in
My
question?
use cases. I got my
Okay, yeah, go for it.
All right, and we'll get to questions. So hopefully we'll wrap this up in a few minutes so we can talk more about the questions you have. So I'd like to bring this one up because this one, there's no extra querying. There's nothing out there. This is still very, very performant. I have no concerns about using this one. But what I'm doing here is I'm normalizing the output. I'm rounding. And in this case, I am rounding to the 25%. I had something that was a little too variant. There's too much variance in what goes in. And so I am rounding the percentage of incidents resolved by the first assignment group. The times 4 rounded to the 4 thing, this gives me quarter points. I only want to see 97.5, 97.75, and 98. I don't want to see a 98, 97.88. Super useful to do something like that, whether you're rounding to a whole number. I take it back. You can actually do that with just formatting it in the indicator. But if I wanted to do more than formatting, I want it to be half points or quarter points, we could do that with math.round. We have access to the full JavaScript library. Also useful for min and max, which I'm missing an M in here for, but min and max, because I never want to show it go below 0. I have some formula and it can go below 0. We have options for the forecast, but we don't do an option to say, change the number. Well, you can change the number. Full access, whether to the math functions, right? To everything JavaScript has access to. The next one, I should actually put this first. This is the normal one, right? This one shouldn't be shocking. Everybody knows this one. We do it all the time. You have standard arithmetic operators. So not just functions in JavaScript, but operators, multiplication, division, subtraction, addition, all of those. Modulus, whatever you need to have, we can do that. These are running again on the aggregates. So I'm putting in, I want the average unassigned duration of resolved days for the breakdown 7 or with the time series 7-day running average divided by the duration of assignments of resolved incidents, times 100 to give me a percentage. So when you see times 100, it's because we're dividing something out, but I want a percentage, so we multiply it by 100. You have access to that. Normal one, everybody sees this, but we can round this. We can run whatever we want to do with math or any other JavaScript function. One we get asked about occasionally to come through is put a constant in. So normally, I'm going to look for a manual indicator or an automated indicator that's collecting the normal date if I was doing an FX rate or something to store it. Before I want or a manual indicator, often I'll use targets because my targets do change over time. Constants, like pure constant, is odd to me because almost all constants do change. But if you have a real constant, you can do that in performance analytics. Super simple. I'm going to create a formula and put in the constant as the last line. The note here, and I'm not aware that we have a bypass for this, but this is one that catches a lot of people off guard. There's an optimization that if there are no indicators, then there must not be a score, which is not always true. So in this case, I'm going to put an indicator in there. The curly braces mean don't ignore all breakdowns. So it's very clear. It's going to look up one score from the scores table, which is very, 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 very fast. It's all indexed and looked up, and then ignore it and just tell me 50. In all the formula indicators, the last line is what's returned. The last line is what's returned. So you'll see either there is only one line, or we'll see a calculation with res, or in this case, it's a constant of 50. But if I want to have this will give me a constant line of 50, which I can use however I want to use it. The next is show or hide scores based off of the date. And I have manual scores. The manual scores doesn't matter. This is where I don't want to show any scores before a specific date. Process change, something happened. I have the scores and I'm not willing to delete them yet. I can put a function field on there that will delete them. So in this case, we're not going to show any scores that are before March 1st of this year. If you're watching the recording, we recorded this in 2024. So it's not going to show any scores before them. They're just null. There's no value. I don't have a last line, so it's null. It's useful sometimes. I'm hard coding the date in here, which might be okay. I could also have it look at a system property. I could have it do a query, but if you're doing a query, it means every score it's got to do a query. So you got to be careful about that. I might just put my constant in here, but it is something where I don't want to show these scores, or to this group, we don't want to show them, but we're going to keep them. We're not going to delete those old scores. I can use score end, score start. There's information out there about the docs. We use these in performance analytics scripts. Score end and score start, they're the same in PA formulas. You also have score end and score start. Normally I actually use score start. I think there's some weirdness that comes in here, but they are the date that you're viewing. The date that you're viewing. So it's comparing, is this score for this aggregate on or before March 1st, or on or is comparing it, and then if it's after, it'll show it. But score start and score end are often used if I'm doing some date comparison. This is the use case I see most often, and then I can just use a new glide date time, and the score end is a glide date time, so I can use the compare function, compare to. All right, this is the one. It exists. You're seeing it. You can do it, but again, be conscious of when you're using it and that you're not using it overly. This will say when I get a score back, go in and query the FX rate table for USD. I believe the FX rate is based on euro. That might differ per instance. It used to always be euro. But in this example, I'm collecting data on euro and then I'm translating it on the fly based off of the FX date for that day. The FX date. Now I could do some collection and maybe I can get around this and put it all PA scores and make the FX rate a PA score. I could probably do that. There's probably a better way to do this, but I didn't. And in this case, I'm getting the latest FX rate for that score that might be loaded afterwards. That's where you can get into some weird stuff. It's just getting the latest one and one. If I'm looking at 100 scores and I have to run this query 100 times, whatever. I can do 100 queries pretty quickly. But if I were looking at just a ton of data points, or I'm layering on index scores, that's when we can start seeing some performance issues because it is running this query based on every different score date. But I can do it. And sometimes there's absolutely valid use cases to do this. So if you see at the bottom, we're getting an indicator, the percentage of incidents resolved by first assignment group. Why that is divided by rate, that's probably not a super real use case, but I'm able to run that query. I'm able to get a value and then use that in my indicator. This can do anything, whether I'm looking at up an FX rate, whether I'm calling a REST, I'm using Integration Hub and calling some web service to get some value, you can do those things. Often I'm going to want to materialize it, just like we had with calculated fields, that we can do them on the fly, but I'm probably going to use a flow and a static field. Maybe I'm going to create a table and put it in there. But there's some cases where this is not used very often, and I want it to be dynamic. I don't want to create a new integration and do a bunch of stuff. So you have this option if that makes sense. Okay, some important notes. This allows you to visualize and set targets where you previously couldn't. So we saw in the example before where we had a 20% decrease in backlog. Well, I actually want that 20% decrease to be my metric, and I want to target that. I'm giving a blanket requirement to all of my teams to reduce their backlog by 5% each quarter. That is my target. And instead of having to go look at that, I can create that derivative target using formulas so I can measure your backlog reduction. And then I can set a target on that formula, right? Super, super powerful. If I just do the calculations in Excel, we're not able to leverage everything we have in ServiceNow. And be careful. This can add complexity, right? Routing layers. So just be careful, be aware. The next part we're going to get into that comes through is using PAFormulaUtils. So you'll see this when you're using a formula. You can browse a method. And we have several methods that are specific to performance analytics that help you use other data in different ways. So whether I'm getting the global target for something, if I have a breakdown, you set targets for each of the breakdowns, but I don't want to do that. I just want the global target so I can say, give me the global target. I want the global target for everybody is 98% SLA attainment. I don't need to set that for every group, but I do want to see my comparison. So we're able to do those things. There's several of these things. We're not going to go through them all, but if you browse method, you can see them and it'll tell you how to call them. When we do that, you select the method and then it'll give you the properties that you want to call, whether you're putting in a hard-coded date with the date picker or I'm putting in score start or score end or whatever it's going to be. You'll supply those values. It'll tell you how to use it. The next example I have now to go through, we're using those formula utils to get the gap. That's what we were talking about before, where the gap is what's the difference between the target and the actual. That allows me to build index scores. We used to do a lab on this at Knowledge. I think we still have, it might be still be something in Now Learning, and there is an old Academy session on this. We spend an hour talking about this use case. But to go through, it's really important that I can start having an index score. So it is my SLA attainment plus my backlog reduction plus my CSAT gives me an index score that I can combine those groups with weightings that I want to give them to. In this case, they're equal weightings, but I could do other weightings too, that this is 25%, 40%, and 35%. Hopefully I got that right when we do the recording. If not, Thomas will edit it out and fix it for me. Really, really useful and powerful to do index scores using formulas. And index scores can get really interesting when we're doing gaps and doing a lot of other things between them. So I want to, as long as I'm setting the target, every group in this case, we're not hard coding targets. In the old days, we hard coded targets. But in this case, we set your target for your group and we're measuring you based off of the index of your actuals to your target, which can be weighted or which are different values for everybody, but the index of improvement is the same. All right. And we can look at setting the targets compared to itself. So backlog growth, this is the formula we use for this one. This is probably the most common function that I use in formula fields, the most common PAUtils method, which is comparing last period. So I'm using score start and I build the first of the month. I'm using score start. So it's taking whatever day it's showing. That's the score start. I get the year of that. I get the month of that, and I make it the first. And then I subtract the day. There's not a subtract method. There's an add. So I add -1 day, which gives me the last day of the previous period. And now what I'm getting is the change percentage between today, score start, and the last day of last month. And that helps me understand between last period and this period, what was my growth. So if I want to look at backlog growth, that score can do it. This helps me do more time manipulation. It can be a little screwy up here. So you're going to test it. You definitely want to look at the docs. This example, and most of the examples are in the documentation. So go take a look at that. But this is how I can start doing things like comparing my reduction month on month. year over year. I can see it in performance analytics in the analytics hub, KPI details. I can see it on a dashboard, but when I want that to be my target, we need to build a formula so I can set a target on that itself. So I can look for thresholds in that itself. And then this gets a little wild. This one, this one always makes me a little cringy when I look at it, but we can use the formulas to get the current breakdown, to get the current element, and make some adjustments to come through. So it might be, in this case, we're filtering out P1s. I don't like hard-coding sysids ever or anywhere, so I might set some system properties, which I have access to because it's fully JavaScript. I can use a gs.get property, but I can do some manipulation from things. The reason this is here is because we know there are use cases that people export to Excel and do weird stuff. I don't like it. I don't recommend it, but I know we have to do it. And so we have a lot of functionality that we can put into the formulas. This, because it's getting the breakdown ID, the element ID, it has this data. These are not queries that it's running a bunch of stuff on. Be very, very cautious if you're running a glide aggregate or a glide record in a formula or in a calculated field. But manipulation through math, looking up another indicator with some limits, getting the gap, all that stuff. We optimize that as much as possible, and doing some of these alterations. I do want to question why we're doing it, but again, I know that there's cases where we need to do it, and I'd rather do it here and do it in a formula and have it audited in my update set, in my system log that we did it and who did it, than export a bunch of data to Excel to let it go. I am going to wrap up a little bit and we'll get into some more questions. There are a bunch of resources in here, so when we get this posted, we will get these resources out here. Most of what I showed you is in the docs, so we'll point you in the right direction for what's there. There's a formula indicator course in Now Learning that you'll probably want to take along with the other performance analytic ones that come through there. And then again, lots of documentation that come through. And with that, I want to see if I can answer a few more questions before Thomas.
Yeah, most of the ones that are there are very specific use cases for formula indicators. So if you want to talk to those, yeah. Which is kind of tough because you may actually have to show them. So we may have to maybe put those questions in a blog or something with the answers, but go for it.
So one of them comes in about a use case where we're building a formula to use a quarter period weekly average to subtract the weekly average from all the incidents plus what comes in. Yeah, you could do that. I can totally see being able to do that as long as you have the indicators, and if you're using the formula indicators, say, give me last month. I think it's definitely possible to do. Getting the right order of operations is a bit tricky, but you're going to use the formula utils, the PAFormulaUtils API to get the previous score. So when I'm looking at July 1st, I'm going to get the score from Q2. Every month for 3 months is going to be looking at Q2's number. So you'll build that date like we saw, and then you'll add and subtract based on what you want to have. I get worried with some of the complexity of these things because you really understand when people are looking at it, you really understand what it is. I understand SLA attainment, but a bunch of alterations. But again, I see it as I want to compare our performance to a specific date. Like we changed our process. This is a few years ago. I know we changed some process on July 11th. So we had 7-11 hard-coded in because we don't want to ignore everything before then, and that was the baseline. Or every release, we'll do this at ServiceNow, that we're comparing on a given release date. That's the comparison. So we're comparing release over release, which is not quarters. It's not directly 6 months all the time. But we have a date in the system that says this is this date. So you're comparing the growth from the release date, and then when the next release dates, you start comparing to that release date. So I think that's definitely doable, and I don't have any performance concerns about it. So how long things have been open to, we were talking about this, about the now for a function field. I believe an admin can put in now. I think that's real. It is not documented, which probably means it's not supported, but it's worked since Madrid, or it's not going to work, one of the two. I'll continue to pass that down. We have this recording. We'll pass this back to our product management counterparts on the inbound side to go, hey, we need to support this. That is my favorite use case because it's something that always has to be right. A calculated field and a formula field will not be correct if you query on dates on the how long it's been open. So you have to get into you want to display it's been open for 4 days, but you have to query on created date. And that is complicated, right? It's complicated for my users. So I'd rather have, hey, give me everything that's been open more than 4 days because that's how I want to see. That's what we're talking about. But report designer will not let you do it, but I believe admin will. And is it possible? So Thomas, tell me when we get the boot and we need to wrap up. To display the average of incidents over a period of 6 months. Yeah, okay. So great one in here. Is it possible to use formula indicators to display the weekly average of incidents over a period of 6 months? So if you're building the dates, you can do some of that stuff. So one of the things that I had is I wanted to get the I did the easy one. I'll tell you, my easy one is give me the backlog. What was it on the last day of last month, which is hard in a lot of places if you're trying to do 28, 30, all that stuff. But if it's easy to calculate the first day of the month, like I had in those constants, -1, that's it. But some of the things that I'll do is average, whether I'm picking the 15th of the month or I want to get a monthly indicator. I'm going to take last month. I'm going to get a monthly indicator. I'm going to use a time series to give it monthly to get that score. And then I can use the PA formulas to say the benchmark I want to have is the monthly average of backlog every day, not the last day, not the first day, not the 15th, but the average. So you definitely could do some of those things and have a 6 week rolling period. You can do some really, really creative things with the get date, get target, and looking at score start. You know what day you're at, and it's not today; it's the day the score is from. If you practice and go through some of the things, you'll get it wrong a couple times because you are doing a lot of 3D chess type stuff. But it's very doable, and that's why we built them. That's why we built that formula indicators is to be able to do those types of things. Okay, another one about the first day of the month. So I think we went through that example after this question was asked because we're getting into it. But yeah, getting the first day of last month or the first day of this month, super common, super easy, very performant. It's three-line formula because I don't like to cram everything together. That example is in the documentation. So you're just going to get score. I think it's just get score for this indicator. You'll put the indicator name in, which is the same one you're looking at, and the date, right? And again, you'll build that date with just get score, score start, current year, current month, and then the first.
Okay, maybe one more, and then we'll close out if you want.
Okay, I'm going to answer an easy one that comes through. Does math.round alter the standard precision functionality setting on the indicator? No, it'll still that formats the number. The reason I use math round is if I don't want it to be a whole number. So the precision indicator on the precision value on the indicator is going to give me how many digits of precision to get through or significance to see. But sometimes I won't be able to do that, especially if I'm in the millions. I want to have some dynamic rounding. So if it's in the, you're going to show me whole numbers, but if it's over 1,000, just round it to 1,000, right? When I'm down in the low numbers, keep it low. I want to see the difference between 1 and 2 and 3. But when I don't need to see the difference between 1 and 1,001 and 1,002 and 1,003. So I might put some dynamic routing in there or rounding to format based on this number. This is what we need to do.
Okay, great. I think that one, Jane, Marta, I was going to see if Marta could get to that one. I mean, if you want to try to knock out that other one real quick, and then we can close out, or we can point him to the community, Adam.
The last one of the formula indicators.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I've tried creating formula indicators using glide date, displayed in a single score widget. I'm trying to display a timer. This is just days to go date, days. If you put one in the community, I know we've done that to come through the number. If I have a go live date of October 1st and the number of days until then, I take it back. When you wanted to do something like that, I don't know that it will be a formula indicator. I think that might be a formula field to come through because it's at a row level if I have a specific release. So something like that you might want to look at with, hopefully it's actually with now. This goes back to, can I use now in a formula field? So I have one record for the release and we want to get it. You can do it with a formula indicator where you're basically going to group by the release and pick out what's in there. And you do end up with a min. So you do an aggregate, but you're like, give me the min minus current. You can do minus current date. So if you're having problems with that, put that in the community, tag Thomas and me, we'll take a look at it on what's going wrong. My guess is you're like one line off or one thing that's off, but that's achievable to have in there to get that countdown timer. Whether it's a function field or a formula field. I mean, that's one record to look up. So you might want to look at a formula field. Function fields probably work as well. And then we can do it with indicators. But the first formulas we had calculator fields, which have their issues. We had formula indicators, but with function fields, we don't have to cram everything to performance analytics. We've tried to make sure you don't have to use performance analytics when you don't need targets and performance analytics. There's no target for the number of days to count down. So let's see if we can do it without performance analytics and having to do a lot of extra stuff.
Awesome. Great. So, Adam, thank you very much. I love how you went around and finally got to what I asked for, but I think all of it is pretty awesome. And it's going to be great to have, of course, in our library of our academies, and people will definitely use this as we put it out to the community. So thank you very much and appreciate all the different examples. So really good stuff. Thank you for all the questions and panelists as well. So real quick, let me hit these things. So obviously this will be, make sure you're checking out the community. If you had another question and you weren't able to ask it today for whatever reason, hit us up in the community. You can tag myself and we'll definitely get you an answer. This will be out in the community, like I said, probably tomorrow, but also our new and previous stuff is there, 6 years worth of academy. So check those out. Make sure you're utilizing Now Learning. I hear just simply search for analytics and it's constantly being added to. So check that out. Make sure that you're looking at our curated platform analytics videos and PowerPoints that are out there in the community. Here's the link for that. This will really help you in your journey in platform analytics and also gives you the ability to reuse the videos and PowerPoints within your organization as a whole to train up your users on using it as well. But in a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about exporting dashboards or exporting visualizations, in platform analytics. So come back in 2 weeks, another great session. Once again, thank you, Adam and Patty and Marta and Tara, who has already left. We appreciate it. We'll see everybody in 2 weeks. Thank you.